have become more susceptible to change. But in the city also, we have a very unique resource. We have the only national park in a city right here in Nairobi. So I want to encourage you to also visit this national park and enjoy this resource, because it is also under immense pressure and we don't know how much it will hold. We are hoping that it will hold. Ladies and gentlemen, because I'm a food systems expert, allow me to talk a little bit about the agricultural resources. Farm sizes are becoming smaller and smaller. Our food systems are in a crisis. We are not able to feed ourselves. There's a lot of injustices, a lot of inequality within the food systems. And food systems are also important in fighting hunger, in fighting poverty, and also in the reduction of environmental impacts that are associated also with the food systems. We can also reduce emissions through the food systems. And so, ladies and gentlemen, without talking too much, allow me at this point to thank my Vice Chancellor, Professor Stephen Kiama, who has worked with us. He has given us wise counsel, he has given us facilities, and a very great team that we have worked with. I thank you very much, sir. And now, allow me to welcome you again to Nairobi. Please enjoy the African hospitality. And I want also to encourage you to join the discussions and have such a memorable experience. At this point, I want to invite my co-organizer from the University of Bern, Professor Tobias Haller, to also say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stella. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear honorable guests, in the name of the University of Bern, Institute of Social Anthropology, and the CDE, Swiss Society for African Studies, and the Swiss TPH, also from the Bernese side of the Joint Committee, we greatly thank the University of Nairobi and CETRAD for the great collaboration and the honor that we can host this 19th biannual conference of the IASC here in Kenya. I would also like to thank the sponsors of this event, the University of Bern, the Vice Rectorate, but also the Swiss National Science Foundation, who donated quite a lot of money for this conference. Stella mentioned this collaboration between our two universities, and it's more than 30 years that we work together. And it's also, it can be shown that specifically in the last 20 years, the University of Bern has been engaged in research on the commons in Africa, but also in Switzerland and elsewhere. This work conducted also by my institute and the Institute of fisheries, pastures, forests, wildlife, and biodiversity in general. In order to find out more about this change, we were looking at the history of pre-colonial common property institutions, which relates to the main theme of the conference, the historical legacies. In-depth research conducted in several African Swiss research teams brought into light that the root cause of degradation was located in a major institutional change that happened. This change is the change from common property to state property in pre-colonial times, and then to privatization and open access in post-colonial times. Local indigenous rules on how to handle resources and the knowledge, as well as local views of more than human world, were undermined during this change. But in the context of states becoming increasingly indebted, the paradox of the state being present at the same time emerged. Present as owners of resources, such as fisheries, but paradoxically absent in governance. This process of de facto open access led to the overuse of resources, a situation that I could experience during my research in Zambia in a floodplain that had labeled by missionaries and colonial administrators as formerly the land of milk and honey. So the research was on how this happened, how this overuse could have happened. And that was located really in this institutional change from taking away the common property during colonization times. So hence also the topic of colonial legacies. Since 2000s, researchers observed increasing waves of new forms of what we call land grabbing. Since the triple F crisis, finance, food and fuel, where suddenly a lot of investments was taking place. Later on also supported by increasing urgency debates regarding climate change and biodiversity loss. This later in the context of biofuel production was actually legitimized that this should take place. But these grabbed lands were not just land grabbing. It also grabbed the land which was related and associated to these lands. So we came to the analysis through various research that we're not dealing with land grabbing. In fact, we're dealing with commons grabbing. We could show this in research we conducted in a comparative way in Sierra Leone, Morocco, Ghana, Kenya, Tanzania, and Malawi. In the name also of the ecological turn and sustainable development, we saw new mega infrastructures emerging. Projects that were set up for green energy production, demanding large tracts of land, actually amplifying this commons grabbing. New infrastructures such as also, like in Kenya, the Lapsset corridors, impacting fisheries negatively of local people there, as research could show also from our increasing resource depletion. We heard it from Stella, often falsely blamed on local people, that local people are not able to manage these resources. The call to protect nature is increasing. The legacy here is that what is labeled to be pure nature, they completely ignore that since century, communists had already created what we could call cultural landscape ecosystems. These were not pure nature. People were living there for centuries in these areas. If we take Kenya, the Maasai had been living for a long time in savannas, together with lions, together with wild animals. Actually, the pastures that we find now that we label pure nature is the combination of grazing by these animals together with wildlife. And this created a specific combination of grass on which both wild and domestic animals were feeding. Ignoring this fundamentally is misreading the African landscapes. But misreading the African landscapes is very instrumental to a process that can be labeled now as a green commons grabbing. Local people had to give away to so-called wilderness and nature conservation since colonial times and have now less and less resources to sustain their livelihoods. We heard this also from Stella. This trend is now even increasing because the market-oriented expansion led to a shrinking of resource areas and therefore to the call from the global centers, specifically in the north, for more protection of so-called pure nature. And this, of course, without the commoners. It is not surprising that in international legal and hegemonic frameworks such as the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and the 30 by 30 initiative, local commoners and common property are completely missing. And this after Elinor Ostrom won the Nobel Prize for showing that the commons and common property is the way forward for sustainable use. Unfortunately, ignoring Ostrom's and others' work lead to future undermining of the commons and also to undermining resilience capacities of commoners, as they're facing climate change and biodiversity loss. This is a bit a negative term, and I think what we want is also fighting to get commons recognized in the SDGs, because the commons is a very problematic thing, and I think we as scientists have to fight to get the commons back in there. But coming to a positive side, our research also showed that commoners are not just facing a tragedy of the grabbed commons. It's rather, and in line with Elinor Ostrom's work, a drama of the grabbed commons. Because increasingly, commoners are trying to defend their commons, physically and legally. There's also an increasing local bottom-up institution building process taking place. Our research team could observe this in Zambia, where we saw how different local groups were engaged in discussing bylaws to the national fishery laws in a very participatory way, combining all the institutions which were there before pre-colonial times, rules and regulations, when to access fisheries, how to punish actually free riders, how to adapt this also to a modern human world full of spirits with whom the coordination of the fisheries had to take place. But also combining new issues. As more people were moving in, using the fisheries and overusing them, health and sanitation problems came up. These new bylaws also integrated these problems in order to deal with them. And that brings me back also to Europe, to Switzerland, where we did also research. I made a bit of detour from Africa back to Switzerland. Actually, also many of the work inspired Elinor Ostrom for her design principles, such as the village of Turbel in the valley. We did also research in Switzerland, actually wanting to know how the Swiss commoners managed. Their property rights are secured, but they face the problem that increasingly what they produce is not valued on the market. So they have to balance with the market and the state regarding subsidies. Interestingly, what happens there is also that the Swiss commoners don't have an idea of getting most profit out of it. But some areas such as restaurants or also as way real estates are profitable. This money is then used to maintain areas which are not profitable, such as pastures and also forestry, in order to maintain the commons. So it's not a profit-oriented way, it's a way of actually keeping and sustaining the forests. In Switzerland, in the context of climate change, this is very vital, because as the area gets drier, wildfires are emerging as well, and retention of water is very important to these forests. So ecosystem services are provided by these commoners. And it's the only thing that we have on which we stand on. And I think the pandemic also showed us that the economic system we're staying in is prone to huge crisis. So the commons is also a way for resilience, and I think this is very important. Also, we learned this during the pandemic. Also, we learned this in Switzerland, which is one of the most richest countries in the world. Therefore, new themes come up, such as health commons, regarding how global health systems could be set up in a more commoning and sharing way, and not just leading to profits of big private companies. The same is also true with digital commons. I remind you that a lot of open source development has been done by actually digital commoners and paid by tax money, which is now privatized. All these topics reflect the 11 conference sub-themes which emerge from a commoning science process, defining issues relevant for both research communities as well as for the commoners themselves. Thus, we are extremely thankful for the collaboration between University of Nairobi and University of Bern. This has been a sharing, a commoning science process, which was so important. So all the 11 sub-themes that we are discussing at this conference now have been a joint commoning scientific effort. The conference will hopefully bring back the commons we want into a new development and conservation policies, such as the SDGs 30 by 30. It shall create a new way and shall stop the sidelining of the commoners and the commons worldwide. This demands future actions, because the continuous putting aside of the commoners also will lead us to lose the common ground on which we all stand on. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard it from the Joint Organizing Committee. They have given us a broad spectrum of things, sharing with us life as a young cow, collecting firewood from the forest, collecting or drawing water from a river that was depending on the forest, and with things that do not exist anymore today. And if they do, they have signs of fatigue. This places the beacons of our agenda in this 1 week, and I really look forward to participating in the different panels and listening to more details in this. I now would like to welcome our chief host. He may actually come and tell us joy, but we want to hear him telling us you are wanted in the African way. Professor Stephen Kiama, kindly take the floor.
You are Nairobi. Where you are now is the main campus of the University of Nairobi. We have several campuses. I want to acknowledge all of you great people, and in particular, the president of the International Association of the Study of the Commons, for agreeing with his team to have this great meeting hosted here at the University of Nairobi, and the first time, I'm told, in Africa. So we are very, very grateful. We want to acknowledge all those who are online, including Abriel, the Vice Rector Research, University of Bern, and also the members of the Joint Conference Organizing Committee, our own Deputy Vice Chancellor who is here, Professor Hutchinson, in charge of research, innovation, and enterprise, and the rest of you good people. As I said earlier, this is main campus. The University of Nairobi is comprised of several campuses, about 12 or so, which are placed in different places. Here is where we do Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, which is the main anchor for this program, led here by the chair of the Department of Gender and Anthropological Studies, Professor Oma. Yeah. And here. And that's him. Mm-hmm. And his dean, and he is dean also, Professor Jabo. Yeah. It's one of our biggest faculties, the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. But the other faculties, also with engineering here, the other faculties are in different campuses. That is the University of Nairobi. It's the oldest in this country, dating back as 1946. And also the best in the region. Yeah. So we are choosing a correct thing. Actually, the president of this country, the current president, William Ruto, is a graduate of this university for his undergraduate degree, for his master's, and for his PhD, together with his deputy president. Also, the speakers of the two houses of parliament are from here. The Prime Cabinet Secretary, who will be coming later today, is also from here. And also the President of the Supreme Court and the entire bench are also from here. So that's where you are. I want to give the context. That's the University of Nairobi. And so whatever we do here, everybody is very, very concerned and in particular. So you made a good choice. The vice president of the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, Professor Odingo, was also from here, from the Department of Geography. Yeah. And that Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, together with Al Gore, you remember, won the Nobel Prize. He was there, the vice president, for many years. Professor Wangari Maathai, who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004, was also a teacher here, and also he studied here for her PhD at the University of Nairobi. So we are really a comprehensive university covering several programs. So we hope that you'll get time to get to know the other campuses, in addition to many other tours that have been organized for you. And also that you will have time to interact with the members of the faculty, so that this interaction can continue beyond the conference, so that you have relationships with our faculty from here at the University of Nairobi, for the benefit of where you come from, universities you come from, and for the benefit of the University of Nairobi, for the current and the future generation. Yeah. You are on the subject, a very important subject, the commons we want. The commons we want. I have a little experience myself in the commons. Yeah. When I was growing up, and someone also mentioned this, grazing cattle, in the forests, which was for everyone, and also in the shopping center, there used to be areas you could graze. But with the time, obviously, people started privatizing those and putting up structures to a point that you don't have anywhere to graze in the rural areas, except if you have big pieces of land. But where we come from, we don't have those big pieces of land. So the animals now have been constrained to basically self grazing. In 1993, I was in St. Andrews University in Scotland, when I was doing my master's. And I would enjoy walking on the commons along the North Sea, listening to music. Those days, Walkman was the main thing. Yeah. As a young person, and not having made many friends in that place, it was just my library, and then walking on the commons. Yeah. So I know what the value of those commons. Also, the same year in Free University of Berlin, where I continued to do some work on electron microscopy. And on weekends, I would go to the forest nearby where I was staying, and do some walk or running, very freely. Yeah. And if there wasn't such a thing, I don't know what else I could have done on my weekends, given the way I had to do so much, and I had to take time to think clearly on my project. As a young person also, when I was looking for someone to marry, and I needed to take them out, where you can see it and all this for a long time. Yeah. Then the commons also applied, like Uhuru Park here. Yeah. When you leave for Sunday service, then you proceed to Uhuru Park, and you sit there comfortably, and you talk. I don't know what would have been done. I'm told that the current generation, I think, many of them don't go there. They go other places. But in our time, that was the place. But I think even now, when you pass Uhuru Park, Uhuru Highway on a Sunday, you see many, many young people exiting from Uhuru Park. Uhuru Park was actually protected by one of our staff members here, what I said, Professor Wangari Maathai, the student PhD here. She had to sacrifice to protect it. I hope that one time you pass through there and see the Uhuru Park. So, as I say, then I've had a very good experience with the commons. So, University of Nairobi has a responsibility for generation of knowledge, dissemination of knowledge, therefore, what we are doing it in the right place. We have opportunity to transfer what this very, very important discussion of the commons to the young people, because it's they who must get that value system of protecting what the chair of the organizing committee said has no, in the immediate sense, you cannot see any monetary value. Yeah. That they have to take that value system to the next level, that this is for the benefit of all and that they protect it. Because if they don't, then the humanity is clearly threatened into the future. So for that, I want to welcome you once more at the University of Nairobi and wish you a very, very successful and fruitful deliberation. Asante and God bless you.
I think our Vice Chancellor deserves a much stronger clap. For two good reasons. One, he has confirmed that we are wanted here. So no one else can move around and tell you, please exit. But most importantly, Professor Kiama has so well simplified, the value of the commons. I had never thought that the commons actually are part of the reasons why I have a wife today. we couldn't afford expensive places to take them out. And those river reserves, the riparians, the open spaces in the rural areas and in the urban areas provided the most wonderful place to take your spouse to be out. Thank you so much, Professor Kiama, for sharing with us these personal experiences. I now would like to ask the President to take the floor and talk to us.
Habari, distinguished colleagues. My name is Charlie Schweik. I'm the current president of the International Association of the Study of the Commons. I wanted to say to the choir, wow, what a great way to start our event. It was just fantastic. On behalf of our IASC Executive Council, I'd like to welcome you to Nairobi for our in-person event. And as I was seeing in the hotel, I don't know if you're getting as emotional as I am, but this pandemic we've gone through, and it was spoken earlier about the planning 2 years ago, and you think about that and how challenging that planning was in an uncertain environment. I really didn't expect to be sitting here with 500 people where we're doing this. And it's just wonderful. And I hope you're feeling this way. This feels like a homecoming of sorts. Our last biannual was in Peru in 2019. So I'm wondering, for those long-standing IASC members, can you raise your hands if you feel like you've been with the IASC for a decade or more? I just want to see. Okay, yeah, decent number. The pandemic years were difficult, and not all nonprofits got through that period. And so I want to give immediately my gratitude, our gratitude, to Inza Fisfeld, our former president, who navigated this pandemic along with her predecessor, Marco Johansson at Arizona State University. And Karen Burgermeister, is Karen in here? Our executive director. And the council and all the members, that was a difficult period, and we got through it, thanks to the hard work of Inza and colleagues. This is also exciting because, in fact, we did have a conference way too long ago on the African continent in Zimbabwe in 2002. So it's exciting to be back for that. And we also, more recently, have had regional conferences. So we have IASC Africa Conference, and I'm wondering if Evaristo Mapenza is here? Evaristo is our regional coordinator for Africa, and he just ran last year an online conference. So we've had a presence here, but it's just wonderful to be here. Now I'm kind of wondering, raise your hands on this. How many people attending this conference, is this your first conference? Yeah, a lot of people. Wow. It's wonderful to see you. So I'm going to just take a couple minutes to just, because I'm imagining some of you maybe really don't know about IASC and what IASC is about. So I thought I would try to describe this a little bit for you. IASC is the premier scientific organization studying commons and commoning. We seek to answer questions around collective action, self-governance. We are grounded in theory. We undertake empirical research that's scientifically sound and carefully administered. An obvious example of that has already been mentioned is Eleanor Ostrom, who for her lifetime of quality science was awarded the Nobel Prize for her work in the commons. And she was one of the co-founders of IASC in 1989, I think. I'm curious, raise your hands. How many people in here actually worked with Eleanor Ostrom? So we have people still here that Lynn unfortunately passed away in 2012, but we have at least a handful, or probably 10, that worked with her. How many people in here were actually graduate students that worked that she advised? I'm in that camp. A couple others, okay. How many people in here are actually graduate students of Lynn's graduate students? Yeah, so Lynn's legacy continues. And I'm sure we miss her greatly. Okay, so we're a scientific organization, first and foremost. Secondly, we're an organization that wants to create dialogue between science in the commons and practice in the commons. Vincent Ostrom, political scientist, one of his quotes that I really always liked is, "Theory without experience is fantasy. Experience without theory is blind." So the important dialogue between practice and science is hugely important, and that's part of what this community is about. How many people in here consider themselves a practitioner of the commons? Yeah, thank you for coming. And we look forward to hearing your remarks, your participation. IASC is a global community with regional activity. So we have regional, based on continent, we have regional areas. And so depending on where either you're from or the geographic area that you study, through this conference there are regional meetings, and we really encourage you to attend those meetings and make those contacts. Again, we're here together finally, make those contacts with people that are in your region. One of the things I hope is that you all think about what you would like to do in your regions beyond this. And so if you get ideas, talk to me. I want to hear anything you're interested in doing. We also are a community that studies thematic areas. So IASC has a long history in the area of natural resources, studying common shared, such as water, forests, fisheries, and other resources. How many of you fall in that category, that you study natural resource commons? Okay, quite a few. And that's a rich legacy with our community. As Tobias said, we also have what sometimes we call new commons. So we have a whole series of talks around knowledge commons, open source hardware. We've got a new effort in space commons. And I'm just throwing out a couple. There's a session this year we've never seen before on philanthropy in the commons. So there are lots of new commons that are going on that we're also studying. How many of you fall in the new commons category? Okay, yeah. So another part of IASC is that we're a community who investigates new research methods. So we have internationally renowned scholars and practitioners who are experts in different research approaches. We have quantitative and qualitative experts. We have what we call institutional analysis, folks that study governance. And one of the examples here, there's a set of panels and there's also a workshop, just as an example, on the institutional grammar, which is one approach to study institutions or rules. And that's by Saba Siddiqui, Christopher Franz, Ute Brady. Are they here? Yeah, there's Christopher, hi. IASC is also a transdisciplinary organization. So we have, I love this statement too, the vast majority of our problems are not vertical, they're horizontal, right? They cross disciplines. And that's one of the rich things I've always felt about IASC is we bring all these disciplines together, coming from different vantage points to talk about commons and doing commons research. Political science, management, economics, anthropology, sociology, ecology, computer science, and others. So that's all represented here. IASC is also a cross-cultural organization. We're a community who cherishes different viewpoints and wants to learn from each other. So you're going to see that in those panels. I'm almost done. IASC has a really energetic early career network. Is Lavanya here? So there's our leader in that. It's a large group of early career scholars. And we have a session. Oh, great. My computer battery just died. It's telling me to get off the stage. So that group, and we have a meeting on that. So I'll close by just saying, if you are interested, now you're all members, thank you for joining us. If you want to learn more about the IASC as an organization, we have a session. It's at lunch on Wednesday, and the room number in the program is incorrect as I understand it. It's LT 410 if I remember. So please come to that. Grab your lunch really quick and come to that. We want to take advantage of us being in person to continue to build our community and, as was said, build relationships with our Kenyan colleagues here. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you for the organizing committee. Unbelievably great job. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Our next speaker is online, and I would like to invite Professor Tobias Heller to introduce that next speaker for us. Tobias.
I'm very, very honored that we have our Vice Rector Research from the University of Bern joining us online. He had been a very, very big support to this conference. He's interested in the collaboration between the University of Bern and different African universities. Please welcome Hugh Abriel of the University of Bern.
Well, I assume you hear me well, dear colleagues, distinguished guests, and members of the for the study. So yes, I'm here in Bern, Switzerland. I could not make it. It would have been very, very nice to be able to greet and to be with new friends from the University of Nairobi, Professor Kiama and Professor Hutchinson. Yes, my greetings to you all, whether it's morning, afternoon, and evening, where you are. So I've seen people coming from the different parts of the world online. So as the Vice Rector for Research at the University of Bern, I'm also very pleased and proud to welcome you at this global conference. Indeed, it has been said the University of Bern is co-hosting this important event with the University of Nairobi. And in fact, more and more these universities are working together. It has been said at the beginning, the University of Nairobi is a member of the renowned African Research Universities Alliance, ARUA, while the University of Bern is on its side, is a member of the so-called the Guild, which is an association of 21 research-intensive universities from Europe. And we are extremely pleased to be part of these partnerships in co-organizing this conference these coming days. So, as a matter of fact, today that's really the perfect timing, because we are able to announce the recent launch of 17 clusters of research excellence that are co-led by these two alliances, ARUA and the Guild. And these clusters will address major global challenges. The University of Bern will be co-leading two such clusters of research excellence that will be located on the African continent. One of them is water and land management. It's a collaboration with the University of Addis Ababa, while the other one is on genomics for health, with co-led by Stellenbosch University. And we are extremely happy to partner also within these two clusters of excellence with the University of Nairobi. So these clusters are clearly addressing additional commons. So we've heard about that, water, land, but also the genomic information for a better human health. And I have to say that I find the concept of considering genomes, these genetic informations, in particular the genomes of the thousands of diverse populations across the African continent, as commons. I just learned now that there are these new commons to be extremely relevant. And I don't know whether now already or in the future there will be symposia and events about this concept. So these two clusters I just mentioned, they perfectly symbolize the commitment of thousands, zillions of scientists from every corner of the world, but in particular from these ARUA universities and universities to address these global challenges. And well, I'm not in Nairobi. I'm pretty sad about this, I have to say, so it will have been a wonderful opportunity, but it's my great hope that your conference will act as a catalyst for really important discussions, innovative ideas, and future collaborations. And through this common effort, and with the backing of alliances that I mentioned, the Guild and ARUA and these clusters, we may learn from each other and unite in our quest to build what you call the commons and that we call the commons we want. So that would have been it. In conclusion, I really extend my very warm thanks to all you all and wish you a very enlightening conference days in Nairobi. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your inspiring remarks, Professor Hugh. We are slowly shifting from the opening ceremony to the first official speech of the conference through the keynote address to be delivered by Dr. Mordecai Oganda. Dr. Mordecai Oganda is a Kenyan carnivore ecologist and conservation policy scholar. He has been involved in conservation policy and practice for the last 2 decades or so, especially in Kenya, but also in other parts of Africa. His work focuses on human-wildlife conflict mitigation, carnivore conservation, community-based conservation, wildlife policy, wetlands ecology, and conservation education. Dr. Mordecai Oganda holds a Bachelor's of Science in Zoology and a Master of Science and PhD degrees in animal ecology. In the course of his work, Dr. Oganda has also taught at Colorado State University and Michigan State University, focusing particularly on the nexus between conservation and human rights. And I think, because I've also known him personally for quite some time, the accumulation of his work in conservation can be traced in his scholarly work and the most recent publication or book called The Big Conservation Lie. It was published in 2017, which was co-authored with Mr. John Barria. Dr. Mordecai Oganda currently serves as the Director of Conservation Solutions Africa, a natural resource management consultancy firm based in Nanyuki at the slopes of Mount Kenya. Ladies and gentlemen, could we put our hands together to welcome our first keynote speaker, Dr. Mordecai Oganda.
Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I have looked around and I know where all the exits are, so if my talk causes any consternation, I know where to go. Thank you very much, Professor Kiama, Vice Chancellor, University of Nairobi, the President of IASC, and the organizing committee, especially Dr. Kiteme, who first reached out to invite me to participate in this conference. Now, very rarely am I asked to speak, and I wonder, why on earth did they invite me? This is one of those times, but I think they had an idea of what I might say. So, if we could go to my presentation, please. Yes, the commons we want is the theme we have here at IASC 2023. Next slide, please. And the title of my talk is Whose Commons? And this is a deep philosophical question. We have lots of technically qualified people around here, but the philosophies I feel from my experiences where natural resource scientists And natural resource science fails miserably in the world today, exacerbating the crises that are caused by global warming, etc., etc. Next slide, please. Images like this from the IASC feeds and website encapsulate the sort of beauty and complexity of what we are talking about. But we need to think about what is a common, first of all. Next slide, please. And it's a resource shared by the general public. It might be intellectual resource or natural resource, even built-up resources. And the next thing draws on the theme of the conference, the commons we want. Next slide, please. Who are we? We as in the commons we want. If I may put it in Kiswahili, tunataka kama nani? Sisi kama nani? Those of you who understand Kiswahili. And next slide, please. So a lot of the commons we have today are gravely endangered, not just by degradation, climate change, etc., but are threatened by capitalists and their agents, who are us. By us, I mean practitioners, conservation scientists. Because we have this cycle where wealthy oligarchs decide they want to get into conservation as a form of self-actualization and say, I'm going to give $2 billion, and scientists scramble that, write proposals about how we can do exactly what you are dreaming about in your warped childhood dreams and put it in reality on the ground, as long as you give us the money. Next slide, please. There's this, the tragedy of the commons, the so-called tragedy of the commons. It's from Garrett Hardin, published in Nature 1968. Garrett Hardin could not see how human beings can use a resource sustainably together, the way Africans have done for millions of years. And he's basically a white supremacist, if you look at a lot of his writings, etc. But we adopted his theory of this tragedy, much to our detriment to this day, long after he died. Next slide, please. Now we have lots and lots of people, just please roll the slide, lots of wealthy people getting into conservation as self-actualization. Jeff Bezos is special because he actually says after he flew in his rocket, then he saw the Earth from out there, he decided it's precious. Yevgeny Lebedev is another oligarch who's involved in conservation. And we mustn't underestimate the power of these people. Next slide, please. Because that's Lebedev at the COP in Glasgow, basically sharing his vision to the then president of Kenya and a number of cabinet members. So when these people come back to Kenya, small people like Mordecai don't have much say because he's already run his vision past the president and the cabinet and it's been adopted. Next slide, please. Now, we have to look at, this is commonly in conservation science circles where I work, this is called habitat encroachment. And this is use of the commons. This is what Dr. Mukovi just referred to as a food system. That's a food system happening there. Next slide, please. We call that a riding safari. It's the same thing happening in the same place, just different species of domestic animals and different race of people using that commons. But this is a lifestyle system. This is not a food system. The local people in that photo, you can't see them, but they're the ones who groom the horses, they feed the horses, and they make lunch for these guys when they're back from the safari. It's a dependency system. And we as scientists have been constantly pushing this dependency system at the expense of the food system I spoke about earlier. Next slide, please. And this dependency system is not sustainable. That's why it has to be guarded by force of arms and ammunition. I'm sure many of you have seen these people in Kenya. We call them conservancy rangers, and they guard conservancies, which are protected areas protected from their owners. I need you to understand that. Next slide, please. So we have various philosophically flawed schemes that we have launched in this day and age to tackle climate change. Elsewhere, effect elsewhere. And the world isn't like that. These offset schemes are like there's a kid who misbehaves somewhere, but there's a kid somewhere else who gets punished for it. More punishment, more misbehavior, more punishment. What you end up with is a kid suffering in one place and a schizophrenic kid in the other place, a psychopath. And this is what we are creating at a global environmental level. Untrammeled consumption on one end and untrammeled oppression of people on the other end. So dismiss these things. I would have wished that the Prime Cabinet Secretary would have been here, because I was alarmed that with our understanding of how carbon schemes are all skewed scams, that the Kenya government currently has a climate change amendment bill that includes this, wants to include these carbon schemes in legislation. And that's a problem. But philosophically, we here in this company are the ones who have to guide our policymakers through this labyrinth of dishonesty. Next slide, please. If you look at that map, is from Sightline Institute. It basically shows the top carbon polluters in the world. You see the global north there. South Africa is there in Africa, probably because of their use of coal. But you go to the next slide, please. And if we look at composition of Earth, consumption of Earth's resources, we need 5 Earths if we all consumed at the rate of the United States. We need 3 if we consumed at the rate of the UK, 2 and something if we consumed the rate of China. Niger, typical African countries down at the bottom there. But you find the United States advising African countries on how to manage their environment. There's a problem here. If anyone should advise us, it should be India. But I'm yet to see any Indian coming to advise us on how to manage our environment, which I think they should do. Next slide, please. These are carbon sequestrations, distribution of carbon credit schemes and sequestration schemes around the world. Next slide. See, that's Asia. Next slide. But that's North America. Very few in North America. Actually, there are very few actual carbon sequestration schemes in North America and Europe. They sequester their carbon in Africa. The only honest part of this scheme is in Asia, where they pollute and sequester in the same place. This is colonialism in a nutshell. And we here are the agents thereof. So we must look at ourselves. I know we have many hundreds of doctorates here, but where's the philosophy? Where's the philosophy? Next slide, please. But the European Parliament recently caught on to the fact that grabbing some land in Africa doesn't clean up the river in Germany or Europe or wherever. So they've abandoned neutrality claims based on offsets exclusively, which is good. But the problem, agreements are still being signed now. This was last month, May 2023. Agreements are still being signed now for carbon sequestration. There are 25-year agreements, 30-year agreements. And I've been privy to some of them here in Kenya. Next slide, please. The EU itself has what they call the Nature Africa Initiative. This was launched in Marseille a couple of years ago at the World Conservation Congress. And those are the landscapes and seascapes that they want to basically take over in Africa. Those are commons. Those landscapes and seascapes are commons. And that's what we are there to lose. I looked through all the documentation. I couldn't find any such scheme for Asia, South America, Australia, or Oceania, or anywhere. It's only about Africa. So this sort of needs to raise our aerials. These are red flags. Next slide, please. Apart from that, we also have the cryptocurrency blockchain thing. We now have dams in Virunga producing electricity to mine Bitcoin. So they're using commons in Africa to somehow gain materially, to actualize material gains that are applied elsewhere or that go elsewhere out of Africa. This is commercial climate resource colonialism. And this is what we must look at philosophically. We know all the technical things. There's very little technical stuff left to be discovered about the commons. It's the philosophical questions we need to really deal with now. Next slide, please. How can we actually be useful to the commons? Because most of us are detrimental to the commons now. And I'm talking about us scientists and practitioners. We are what in Kiswahili is called vibaraka. These are sort of, vibaraka in English translates to sort of paid right-hand men or court jesters who serve nefarious interests. We have to develop new standards and definitions. We have to use indigenous knowledge. So we can't take everything from what's been published in Nature and try and bring it to apply it in Nyanza somewhere. We have to entrench indigenous livelihoods and aspirations in this discourse, partnering with the humanities. I cannot overemphasize that. Tourism should be removed from this discourse. Kenya is one of the major victims of this. That's because we've always had this strange cabinet ministry called Tourism and Wildlife. Tourism has nothing to do with wildlife conservation. It's a byproduct. It's like you don't keep livestock for the leather. You keep them for meat and milk. Leather is a byproduct. So we cannot have tourism at the same table with conservation because that means we are doing it for outsiders. What are we doing for ourselves? Tourism should take advantage of what we have done for ourselves if it's good enough. Human population should be removed from the commons discourse because it's not something we can apply any of our skills to. We are not seeking to eliminate human beings or else there's a problem. That human population in the discourse, that comes from the tragedy of the commons, that white supremacist thing. So we should remove that. Human population should be discussed by people in the services like education, healthcare services, and these kind of things. That's how we'll move forward. That's why in countries like China, they have the endangered giant panda. You never hear that the 1.5 billion people are endangering the panda. But you always hear that there are too many people in Thailand, they're endangering elephants, they're endangering lions, they're endangering this, that, the other. It has a racist ideology at its basis. Next slide, please. To protect the commons, we must protect people, systems, and livelihoods. Then the commons will be all right. We do not achieve this by protecting geographical areas. That's a primitive idea that came from Roosevelt, a megalomaniac who knew nothing about ecology. We cannot be saying we need to expand protected areas. The 30 by 30 UN scheme, for example. Went to New York, I didn't see any plans to expand Central Park in Manhattan by 30%. I didn't see any plan to expand Regent's Park in London by 30%, but they want to expand Mount Kenya National Park near where I live. They want to expand Tsavo, Masai Mara, Amboseli, because we need more room for wildlife. So we have to look at the prejudice that lies inherently in a lot of these things. Next slide, please. The science, and I'm a scientist, do not blindly trust the science. Understand and apply the science. This is very important because scientists, just like everyone else, can be dishonest. They lie, they massage data. I'm sure many of us in our statistics classes have heard of it. We remove outliers. This is common practice. So we must understand and apply the science appropriate. Next slide, please. This is an example. A paper published in Nature said the world has 422 trees for every person. And they did that little graphic to show what's the sort of leading countries. So top, Canada, second, Greenland, third, Australia, fourth, United States. These are all settler colonies. The top African country is Ethiopia. Why isn't Gabon there? Gabon would be number one. Why isn't DRC there? Because it would be number one. It might imply that black people know how to conserve forests. And we can't have that, can we? These are the questions we must ask even as we read scientific literature, because there are lies and prejudices therein. These are not Bibles or Qurans or Gita. These are written by real people. Next slide, please. We've recently had an attack on African food systems, pastoralist food systems, by saying livestock is a source of global warming and methane emissions. And we want to remove this and bring tourism. So somehow the carbon footprint of a tourist who flies 10,000 miles and drives in an SUV and stays in an air-conditioned room drinking chilled champagne, his carbon footprint or her carbon footprint is lower than that of that guy with his 50 cows or goats. These are the tales we are being told by scientists and in scientific publications. Next slide, please. The global commons is a poison philosophy, because commons, especially I'm talking about natural resource commons, they're locally defined. They're named locally. They're named whatever stream, whatever forest. They cannot be defined globally. So we must find a finer context at higher resolution to approach the management of the commons. It is imperative that we do that. It is complicated. Scientists will tell you, yes, that is why we have PhDs. We should be able to do complicated things. I see people with PhDs in the field of wildlife conservation coming up with the idea that we should fence Mount Kenya forest, and it's happening. Yet the same people were laughing at former US president when we wanted to fence between US and Mexico. Why are you laughing at Mr. Trump? And we are fencing Mount Kenya forest. We must necessarily seek more sophisticated solutions to the complex problems that we have in the world today. Next slide, please. Now, the global approach to the commons, and this is always a difficult conversation, is the reason why we have conservation heroes. And I've shared a few of the conservation heroes from Africa. None of them are black. You have Jane Goodall, late Richard Leakey, late Daphne Sheldrick, late Joy Adamson, Dian Fossey, Bernard and Michael Jemek, Mervyn Cowie. Why is this to this day? They're more contemporary ones. They're still all white. Why is this? Because we've created this poison chalice called the global commons, where someone from somewhere feels he needs to go somewhere else to save something else. That is the danger of the narrative of the global commons. And these are philosophical questions. And there are things that I've battled with in my several years in wildlife conservation. And now I've realized that these are the problems that we can solve a lot faster and a lot more easily than we can solve the climate change, emissions, etc. We can change our philosophy right now, next week, and make things different. And this is what I'm examining and what I'm sort of calling on us to think about doing. Next slide, please. Here in Nairobi, we've had challenges to our commons from corporate interests. The Aga Khan Foundation some years ago wanted to take over City Park. Fence it, you pay at the gate, then inside there they do what they call improvements to international standards, and then it becomes a wonderful place. And suddenly the people from Mathare who depend on this green space to come and relax during holidays, who can't go up country, have to pay to get in there. But thankfully it was questioned by the state authorities and they put an end to it anyway. But this is the importance of statutory authorities. And in Kenya, the statutory authorities that govern natural resources have been becoming weaker and weaker and weaker with the onslaught of the NGO onslaught and foreign capitalist funding onslaught. And I mean KWS. I wish there was someone here from KWS. It's become a shell of its former self. KFS, Kenya Forest Service. KWS is Kenya Wildlife Service. They become a shell of their former selves. If the money for carbon sequestration was real, KFS should be the richest organization in Kenya. But it still begs for money from Exchequer. Foreign interests give money for wildlife law enforcement, but they don't give it to KWS. They give it to those cowboys I pictured in the slide earlier on. Law enforcement is not even a devolved function in Kenya, not even devolved to the counties. How did we get to a point that NGOs are doing it? When did civil society become armed? It's only in this country. I'm yet to find it in other African countries, but I'm yet to find it outside Africa. We must think about these kind of things. Next slide, please. Nairobi Water Fund. This is a big name. The power behind this is the Nature Conservancy, corporate interests. And it's the Nairobi Water Fund. It's the water used in this city. They're building tunnels, etc., and dams. You have dams like in Ndakaini, for example, that it's water and it's fenced. The people of Ndakaini can't fetch water there. It's channeled to Nairobi through this infrastructure created around these corporate interests. This has happened in Cape Town as well, in South Africa, and various other places, cities that have seen water stress. And water, once water gets privatized, you are in trouble. Little else matters when you talk of the health, sanitation, etc., around water. So this is why we must think carefully about what we are doing. We must advise policymakers, statutory organizations, governments, wherever we come from or even wherever we work. We must frankly advise governments. Civil society is limited in what it can do to change the lives of people. And there's always the interest of the guy funding you, who might just be some billionaire with childhood dreams. Some of them are even billionaires who inherited their wealth, never worked a day in his life, and you, with your PhD, want to actualize his little playground. And these are the things we have to think about. Kenya is very vulnerable at this point to this kind of thing, and I'm sure many of you who take tours will see the problems that we face around here. But the commons survive because of the people. They don't survive because you fenced it. They don't survive because you got funding from some place far away to come and get people to pay for it. Payment for ecosystem services is a term that scientists have bandied around for some years, and it's philosophically flawed. But we say it like it is something proper, and that's the problem. So the commons will persist, and the commons does persist. Our duty here is to strengthen the commons. Find the commons, learn from the commons wherever you are, and strengthen the commons. Even the recent pandemic showed us the risk we are at. We got to a point where governments, including ours in Kenya, were taking advice from software developers about health. Bill Gates was giving health advice. He was advising on everything except software, which is the one thing he knows. But this is the danger we lie. This is the danger that faces us. We think wealth equals authority on whatever field. And it is very hard. You have to deliberately resist this line of thought. Jeff Bezos with his billions will come and tell you, this is how to grow beans. And you say, wow, he doesn't know how to grow beans. He's just wealthy. This is what we have to think about. So the commons will persist. And it's not all doom and gloom, because the resilience of the commons, the resilience of the people translates to the resilience of the commons. Next slide, please. I'd just like to share some. That's from Laikipia. That's a giraffe that used to hang around with people in northern Laikipia. And it died when they captured it and tried to translocate it into a fenced area. They said these people will kill the giraffe. That giraffe died. Next slide, please. That's Bazule in Burkina Faso. It's a village where the crocodiles are their totem. They feed them, they scrub them and play around with them and all that kind of thing. You can imagine a scientist would come here and fence this, make it a crocodile conservancy, tell that kid to keep out, he needs to pay if he wants to pet the crocodile, and that kind of thing. And he'll say, we are saving the crocodiles from these people, we are saving these children from the crocodiles. Next slide, please. That's Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. These are shared commons, but National Geographic, Discovery Channel, all those will never show you this. because Africans are not supposed to be able to live peacefully with wildlife. That doesn't sell. Next slide, please. That's Talek near Masai Mara. This is eland that hangs around there. But all the movies you see from Masai Mara don't have any people in them. But this is the reality. They can live with these animals. Next slide, please. This is actually a video. It's from a place called Kazinga in Uganda. Can you click on it, please, if it will? Yeah. So you can see there's buffaloes hanging around, elephants hanging around, kids playing, guys going to their boats, and that kind of thing. This doesn't sell, so you won't see this. This is from Paul Kirubi. You won't see this because this doesn't sell. These guys are meant to be poachers, or those buffaloes are meant to be killing their children and this kind of thing. So I hope those of you who are visitors, as you go around, you will see commons and appreciate commons for what they are. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. That's my family enjoying the commons that is Laikipia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Monica Luganda. Ladies and gentlemen, I only have one question. What do you think? The protocol team, please, can I have 3 mics? I need to have 1 and 2 in the plenary. Monica, please remain around. You talk to these people, those who may have questions. We're going to give 5, maybe 10 minutes for questions and responses. From Mordecai or any other person, you may have noted something that you may want to raise, those who have spoken earlier on. Questions, observations, additionals, variations also allowed? All right.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for your wonderful presentation and very valuable facts you shared with us. I don't have a question. I just, not say critic, maybe a request. I'm from Asia, West Asia. I'm Iranian. I just want to ask you, please don't leave us alone and don't leave us behind, because, yeah, we don't have these kind of problems. They're similar that you have in Africa, but we have the same situation regarding protected areas and other, let's say, Western constructor, in fact, that comes to our countries and force many our communities and nomadic pastoralists to leave their territories, leave their commons, because the fortress conservation discourses spread all around the countries in West Asia, in Central Asia. You see, in Asia, we more or less have the same situation. We have a constructed contradiction between communities and wildlife who have been living together and learn from each other for thousands of years, and then in less than 70 years, it seems it breaks that, okay, they are just some poachers, they are hunters, they're killing wildlife, and some graduated students without any kind of knowledge, some urban guys have more knowledge than some elder there, and they need to be there. They need to guard, and they need to place some fences around some locations and force communities to live there and territories for so-called protection of nature. So in Asia, in all that space, we have the same situation. So please don't leave us behind. Thank you.
I have a question. Thanks for your talk. Actually, you mentioned in the beginning to keep the tourism perspective out of thinking about governance. I'm wondering from the European perspective, whenever we try to disentangle agricultural and environmental policy, even in two different ministries, it's quite a mess, and it's much better if these competing interests are merged together so that they can discuss and find solutions. Maybe you can explain a little bit more what you thought about that.
Yeah, about the tourism perspective, I'd say from Kenya, they can come to the table, but after we have finished deciding what we conserve and why. So if we can conserve the rangelands in Samburu and work out a way for people to use it together with the elephants and the cattle and the livestock, etc., then the tourists can come and see that wonderful cycle we have. Because right now we have tourists who come to Kenya based on what they see on Discovery Channel. And then he goes to Samburu and he says, my God, I saw so many goats and camels and stuff, and I feel like, if you don't want to see Samburu people, don't come to Samburu. Yeah. So no tourist goes to China and says, I saw too many Chinese people. No tourist goes to Kenya, to India, I saw too many Indians, and this kind of thing. So that's a problem. Our tourism sector builds up this magical Kenya thing. It's not magical. Kenya is real and beautiful. It's not magical. Magical is something for children. So we have to counter that power that comes from mass media, Hollywood, The Lion King, Tarzan. That stuff all bleeds into tourism. And if you bring them to the table, the reality gets further and further away from your reach.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Michael from Nigeria. Yeah, I do really appreciated your presentation, which was excellent indeed. And we also in Nigeria, we face similar situations whereby the cattle herdsmen go around in respect of their grazing, looking for food, for water. Their belief system is that they should go and do that. But now they are causing a lot of harms, whereby the clashes between the farmers, herdsmen, and will cause a lot of problems. So to what he said now, the government is now finding it difficult on changing their mentalities to introduce a series of policies, but they are still agile on doing the work they have to do. So my own question is that how can common change their mentality in respect of what happened in the future to change to the system so that there won't be any clashes? Is there any policy that the government can do, or what can we take home from that? Because you may have a belief system, a norm system that this is what you have been doing for a long time, but because of development have happened, you want to introduce another policy, but they are still kicking against those policies. So I want you to throw more light on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. That's a very important question, especially around pastoralism and pastoralist food systems, production systems. I think as we move forward, we should not be trying to fracture those systems, because what we are doing now, at least in Kenya, we are busy trying to fracture those systems. We should be strengthening them, and by designating proper livestock movement corridors, marked, labeled, protected, improving the breeds of livestock, so hopefully the guy can have the same monetary value in 500 high-quality animals than 5,000 low-quality animals. So things like veterinary care, etc., for these animals, and fair trade markets for the animals and the animal produce. So these are the things we can do. We should not try to fracture these production systems. A short while ago in Laikipia County, in Kenya, which is a pastoralist area, they are trying to introduce feedlots similar to what they have in Chicago. Some guys went to Chicago for benchmarking and came back and said, we want to do feedlots. And I wondered, you feed cows on maize in Kenya? And what's the price of maize? But it's to fracture the movement. But the movement, because those wildlife also uses those livestock corridors, and that keeps the ecosystem going. In a place like the Sahel or semi-arid areas like northern Kenya, sedentarization is not an option. And what these guys have been doing for thousands of years is what is sustainable. So we should not introduce standards of sustainability which are exotic to the place. Thank you.
Can we have two from that side? Back there, and then shall we ask those online with questions to post them so that our team can read them out? Please.
Good morning to the audience, and thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Muniba Isaacs, and I come from Cape Town, South Africa. Thank you very much for, very insightful, thought-provoking presentation you made. But I wanted to ask, is it just about philosophy that we need to, is it just the philosophical questions that we need to ask to scholarship on the continent? Because I feel that we are also lacking in critical scholarship to really integrate these interventions and issues on the continent by Black scholars leading the debate, equivalent to, someone like Professor Issa Shivji, that is constantly raising the critical questions. We seem to have lost that critical thinking and scholarships of what our leaders of the 1960s wanted for the vision of the Africa we want. Thank you.
Yes. The next one, and then you will respond to the two, please.
Habari za asubuhi. I really want to thank you for this really interesting talk, but I'm sadly, the question is not to you. I was very interested right at the start. The organizers asked us how many of us work on commons, how many of us are disciples of Ellen Ostrom. We haven't yet asked the question of how many of us are commoners ourselves who work and ought to defend the natural resources that belong to us. And I think that's a crucial question, because it's true when Eleanor Ostrom and so on and so forth were working on commons, very few of the people she worked with were academics. And now today I know that there are people who are now commoners and who have two hats on, one as an academic, but also as a commoner trying to defend their own commons.
Yeah, thanks for those comments. The first one on critical studies, I think it's crucial, and I'm not sure, probably there are education experts in this room who might know better how to actualize it, but we need to have that critical analysis right across all fields. We even have things like buildings that you don't understand. Why did they design it like that? It seems like a theoretical thing, and now we have to find our way around it. And I think it's very important, especially because that critical analysis brings in local context. That's why globalization of the global commons is a symptom of this failure to think critically. So like at CITES meetings, you have a Kenyan conservation scientist sitting very busy giving his opinions about polar bears. It's none of his business. Let the guys from Norway talk about polar bears. The guys from Norway should not be talking about leopards. It's none of their business. But we've contrived this global village thing that basically doesn't work. And that's why a lot of what we are doing is unsustainable. The one about commoners and disciples of Eleanor Ostrom, it's a very interesting question, and I think it's a state of mind, sort of, because everything I say and think is not because of my education. It's in spite of my education. Everything I've been taught is against what I just told you. My supervisors are not here anyway. So, but we've contrived to create these boxes that actually stifle the thinking, the human part of the thinking. And I think it's a challenge to institutions of, not just of higher learning, but right from primary school, that we keep cutting off these branches of growth of ideas from people, and it becomes very violent. And I know in my personal experience, I've suffered for it. So wherever you are, please don't give up. Keep that spirit up.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just about to do something that many would not like, that we have to move to the next session in the interest of time. And each and every one of us to look for that we think as something that you would like to pick up with them during tea break, during lunch break, in the evenings, throughout the week, complete the discourse. One last clap for Mordecai Loganda. Thank you so much, Mordecai. May I, at this moment, request that all the delegates remain upstanding as our guests in the front bench are walked back to the VIP room, and the others quickly get a cup of tea because the first panels are starting at 11. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful opening session. We have 2 exits. Please, some of you may use this side, and the others use this side, and the others go straight.